Okay, I just hit the go live.
All right, it looks like we are now live on WebEx. We'd like to welcome those of you who are watching this event live, and of course on the watching the recording as well on YouTube. My name is Eric Thompson. I am the communications coordinator here at the Regional District of Okanagan-SIMILKAMEEN. The manager of finance, Jim Zaffino, joins us tonight as well, and this is the electronic town hall for Electoral Area D and the budget presentation. In just a moment, the manager of finance will have a presentation, the latest numbers on the Electoral Area D budget, which has now gone through second reading. And we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers as well through WebEx. I've got a couple of opportunities there. You can join us using your WebEx camera and or microphone. There's the phone option and of course WebEx chat as well. So during this electronic town hall, anyone wishing to ask questions via WebEx or telephone will be given an opportunity to do so based on the time available. If you are participating by computer using WebEx, we ask you to raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, and you can find that feature in the participants panel rather, that's on the right side. You'll see that under the attendee list, I believe it is. And then you can also, once you've indicated that you would like to speak and you've had an opportunity to speak, we ask if you can lower your hand so that we can give other people an opportunity to participate. And then you can also use WebEx Messenger. If you're participating by phone, you press *3. That indicates you'd like to ask a question. And then once you've had an opportunity to ask your question, if you hit *3 again, that will then lower your hand, so to speak. Having indicated that you would like to speak, you'll be placed in the queue and you'll be invited to speak as well. So you'll know when you're about to go live. And just looking at our attendee list right now, we don't have a large number of people tuned in just at this point. So I think we're going to give it just a moment before the manager of finance, Jim Zaffino, does his presentation. So I thought we'll just start things off with just a couple of quick questions if we can. Mr. Zaffino, thank you very much for taking part. I appreciate all the hard work you and your team have done behind the scenes to make this happen, including the electoral area director.
And I also appreciate everyone that's taken the time to listen. There's a lot of work that your director has put into the budget. It's not just staff. And I'm looking forward to presenting this budget.
So March 4th is when we're recording this, and the RDOS board meeting took place on March 4th, and that means second reading of the budget. So a few things have changed.
There's been some changes, some positive changes in that we're able to better identify the carry forwards. A lot of times it's so early that the carry forward is an estimate, so now it's correct. The sterile insect release program invoice came in after first reading, so that is correct now. And council looked at, I came from a background of municipality and council, so I've still got council in my head. And the board looked at some rates, so that also has been adjusted.
All right, and again, this meeting is being recorded, so it will be available on YouTube. So I think we'll get right into the budget presentation. And just a reminder for anyone who is watching and taking part live, you can have an opportunity to ask questions afterwards. So with that, Mr. Zaffino, we'll ask you to provide your budget presentation for Electoral Area D after second reading.
And thank you very much. What I'd like to do is just start off with, let's take a look at the differences between a budget for municipalities and a budget for regional districts. If you were living in a municipality, Penticton, Summerland, Oliver, etc., you would have 3, 4, or 5 budgets. You'd have sewer, water, general, in some cases electric, and others storm drain. Regional districts are a lot different. Each service has to have its own budget. Regional district currently has 155 services as of 2021. So we have 155 budgets. Each service is self-sustaining, which means that you cannot use one service to fund another service. There are some interdepartmental charges like administration, but that is because there's supportive services within the group. The regional district, you could consider your city hall, where we do work in the background to support the services that are required. So along with that, the budget was launched here in October. I started working for the regional district September 28th. The staff started presenting me documents in October, even early November. So we start off with a baseline budget. And from a baseline budget, we start looking at increasing it using inflation, contracts, increase in essential services. There's also some changes that have to be made because of the service level has to increase for specific reasons. Some reasons are water valves might have to be adjusted or replaced that weren't budgeted before. There has been 3 budget workshops on November 28th, as you can see on the screen, November 30th and December 13th. That's where your board reviews the budget, the preliminary budget, and makes some recommendations and changes. One thing that's important, and it's also different than municipalities, is a municipality has to pass their budget by May 14th. We have to pass it by March 31st. So what is different in services provided? There's main different services that are provided by regional districts, and one of them, biggest one, is regional services. Regional services are services where the majority of the member municipalities and electoral areas participate in. However, municipalities would be the biggest area that would have to pay because of their assessments. So these are some of the services within the regional services, and you can see there's quite a few here. And the next page is even more. So with this, you have economies of scale. A lot of times, you're not going to have one municipality provide any one of these services at a cost that the regional district could provide, because we're providing the services for the greater area of South Okanagan. Other services that are provided are rural, and in rural services, that's where the electoral areas participate more heavily in than government. In some cases, the government does, but very rare. And one of the reasons that you see here is that government does not always participate as Pentic and Summerland, etc. They have their own building inspection department, they have their own bylaw enforcement, and they tax for their own services. So those ones there, those services there, you will not see mainly paid for by the municipalities. Other services are shared services and local services. A shared service is where an electoral area has a service, such as I'll use the fire department for Kermias, for instance. They share their service with Kermias and Electoral B and NH. So they get benefit of the service, so they pay their fair portion based on assessment. A local service is one of the last services that we provide, and I'll use the fire department again. A local service is where the electoral area services only benefits that only area, and a good example would be Anagas Mountain Electoral Area A. They only protect their own area, so it's only Electoral Area A that pays for the fire department costs. So from earlier, I discussed that there were some workshops. After those workshops were completed, the budget was taken back to staff, and we amended the budget based on the recommendations made. On January 21st, the board had the first reading, and it's from that, it was amended on an ongoing basis, and it finally came to the board today for a second reading. And just so a heads up there, on May 18th, we're looking at third and adoption. March 8th, yes, March 18th. So factors affecting the requisition for electoral area D. So the property assessments for 2021 for D comprised 5.29% of the total assessments for the total regional district. Not much different from 2020, which was 5.32. The electoral area D assessment went up 1.12% as a total, but that also includes the market change of 0.91. A non-market change is where you've got new construction, new houses, new buildings, new businesses that weren't there to be taxed the past year. So you've got a broader range, and you can spread that tax base over a longer period. So one of the other things that affected your area is the average for the regional district. It was 1.70. Yours was for the electoral area D 1.12, which means that your area is actually bearing less of a burden for this year, just because all of the other areas, one in particular is the Princeton area, for instance, theirs went up dramatically, their assessments, so their burden went up. But also in a few minutes, I do want to talk about non-market change a little bit further, but I will discuss that when we talk about the tax requisition. So what's new? One of the biggest changes that happened in 2021 while I was here was I was asked to relook at the administration costs. And I took a policy to the board rather than a formula. The board accepted the policy, which turned into a formula, and the majority of the new administration policy, actually the burden fell more on electoral areas than municipalities. However, it was the policy, that's where it led us to. We weren't looking at who can save money. We were looking at what is fair. And that's what the board chose, is what they considered fair. And just so everyone out there knows, that's something that staff recommended, is the policy that ultimately was accepted. What's new continued, usually in a budget that's always added in after the board has considered it, is grant and aids, the change request forms, which is a increase in service levels, and finally the budget for capital projects. So that's something that the board considers on a yearly basis. Something new that is with the capital request form now is it's called a project reserve tracker. So when staff asks for a capital, the board knows by looking at the project reserve tracker if it's affordable or not. And it's a 5-year tracking program. So it actually looks at, do we need to borrow money? Do we need to increase reserves? Do we need to set aside money to just get it shovel ready? Because if it's shovel ready, that means we have a better chance of getting reserves or grants in the future. So with that, I just want to show what the board looked at for the grant and aids. You'll see that 25,450 was authorized, 63,900 was requested. I believe last year was just over 40,000 that was authorized. The change requests form, as I stated earlier, essentially that's a service level increase. So usually that would mean that the work that is required needs more staff, and we would need a request for a full-time equivalent staff member. And the following are what was recommended and authorized by the board. So what you see here is a 0.65 FTE increase for a staff member. You can see where the estimate or where the person's time is going. So this is for 2021, and it's a partial year because the persons are not going to start working January 1st. In fact, they may start April or May. So it's an estimate of it's a worst case scenario, I'll say, because if they start in April, that means that we save money and it goes into surplus. You only pay for the services that you've received. So what we've done here for the board, so it's got the name of the service and the department code so that we know that each director knows if they're going to be responsible for a portion of the salary. The next FTE that was requested, it's a little small here, it's 1 full FTE for a project manager. Again, this is for a partial year, and you can see all the different codes that the employee will be expected to work on. A lot of times it is an estimate. However, it's fine-tuned from year to year so that it's fair as we can get. The next FTE here is the 0.35 and 0.38 for the, ultimately it's for the mosquito control program. However, one of the changes made in the budget today is all the numbers underneath the 18,000 were taken off, and it's a smaller increase. I show you this because this at the first level, at the first reading was approved, and at the second reading, I wanted to show you that 3,580 for Nairmat and all the way down to all our landfill are off the budget for this year. And the last two requests that the board accepted was for the Similkameen Recreation and for the Oliver landfill. And again, only the services that get the benefit pay. And there's a new position for electoral planning classification. We're having trouble keeping planners just because of there's not a hierarchy that they can apply from one job and they just increase. So if we increase the position responsibility, we'll have staff stay longer and we don't have to have a training period. So let's talk about capital projects. What I've done here is showed the capital projects that essentially are benefiting or at one point Electoral Area D contributed to. So these numbers are huge in some cases, but someone in the past, some of your directors have thought about what projects are needed and set aside money in reserves to fund these projects. So a lot of these projects are funded with reserves only, and some are funded with reserves and grants. And a lot of times the bigger projects are contingent only on having received the grant, and then we would put in our portion. But at one point or other, there would have been a tax charge that would have gone through reserves. And the better the reserves, the more projects, capital projects that are needed, be affordable. So this is where the budget stands as of today for 2021. You'll see that the expenses for 2020 are slightly different than the expenses for 2021. I've just split out the capital portion just so that it's something that's more comparable in future years. The expense portion on the top line will be more comparable because when you include capital in the operating part of the budget, it's hard to compare year to year. The bigger the capital projects, the higher the budget. I am taking a recommendation to the board this year to split the budget into a budget that is only operating and a budget that is only capital. And that way there, it's a little bit more consistent, and the board will be able to see a little bit more clear on the affordability and how it's the capital projects are being funded rather than being part of a page full of numbers that includes operating. Okay, so the tax requisition. As far as the tax requisition goes for this year, as you can see, it's a little bit small. It's $2.56 million for the tax requisition for the Electoral D, which is $105,000 in increase. I do have the biggest two reasons on here. I did a bit of an analysis with your director's budget. Is that in the area of the budget where your director has more of a control, and that's the regional director determines the budget, such as economic development, grant and aids, rural projects, heritage hills, lighting, etc. It was only a 0.77% increase. In the area where the directors have, each individual director has less of a control, such as 911 emergency, animal control, building inspections, that kind of service, that one there went up 11.8%. And so some of the major reasons are that there was a switch in that administration charge that I discussed earlier, where the burden went more on the electoral area than the cities. And the year before, just to compare, it was the other way around, where the cities had the burden and the electoral areas had the benefit. And so I just wanted to show that yes, there's an increase in there, but it's not it's not under full control of your director. Now, as it stands in second reading, the tax increase is 4.3%, but that non-market growth that I discussed earlier, it was for your area 0.91%. So the actual tax increase for electoral area D is 3.35%. So that will be distributed with the previous assets and the current non-market growth assets. So that's common in municipalities. When there's non-market growth in an area, you should be quoting the tax increase less the non-market growth. That is your actual tax increase. I just wanted to point that out. That's something that I'll be introducing to the CAO here to look at the 2022 budget. So these are the services that I was just discussing about. So this is the section that your director does not have clear control, and there was 11%, just over 11%. You can see that there's quite a lot of services. Electoral area D is a large area. It requires a lot of services that the regional district does on behalf of the area. So the more services that we provide, the more the cost. And essentially, like I stated earlier, we are your equivalent of your city hall, and these are the services that this city hall provides for you, along with other municipalities and electoral areas. So these services are shared services. These next services are the services that your electoral area director has more of a control, and that 0.77, you can see that's where a lot of the expenses were saved. One area and one thing that's worth mentioning is that the regional district received $743,000 in COVID restart funds, and in your area, the electoral area D actually received $86,986 to distribute throughout the area to help out because of COVID. And from that, there was $55,817 that was used to reduce the tax portion of it. And with that, it was distributed in a mathematical formula way to be fair. One of the things that your director did, along with some others, is put in $7,500 of COVID funds to your fire department, and each fire department received that $7,500 for protective gear, and that's above and beyond the equipment that they were going to originally purchase. And this I thought you'd be interested. This is the requisition for all the member municipalities, First Nations, and Electoral Area A. So this year we're asking for $20,432,000. The year before we asked for $20,110,000. It's a fair increase. If you take a look at it, now you're not supposed to do this for regional districts and say the overall increase is 1.6%, because that's not true, because you had to look at each individual service, not us as a whole. We are all residents of specific areas, but one thing we all have in common is we are Regional District Okanagan-Similkameen residents. This is just a clean pie chart to show who pays the most, and you can see that near the bottom is electoral area D. It's got a good piece of the pie, but that's because you're large enough that we have a lot of services that we provide for you. It's not that you're being hit with expenses that you're not receiving. It's on a fair basis, and it's fair, and it's based, except for the mosquito control, mostly on assessment. And with that, this is where you'd find the budget, and that's my name. There's my number. And anytime you wish to call and ask some questions, I'll be glad. If you don't want to call, send an email, and I will answer your email. To me, that's a priority. And I'm here to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. That's Jim Zaffino. He is the manager of finance with the Regional District of Okanagan-Similkameen. My name is Eric Thompson. I'm the communications coordinator with the RDOS. And we are here to answer questions about the draft budget for 2021 for Electoral Area D. So just looking here for our list of attendees to see if we have any questions, and also we have our Q&A available as well. So just pushing a few buttons here to make sure we get all that information available here on the screen. And Jim, in the meantime, you mentioned a couple of things that I thought were quite interesting, but let's start first of all with what happened on March 4th, which is second reading of the budget. So did things change substantially, would you say, for Electoral Area D, or were there some fairly routine changes, would you say?
For D, like all of the other areas, the biggest changes were the COVID changes, because they helped reduce the tax requisition or helped finance some additional expenses that were incurred because of COVID. The other changes were, as I stated earlier, the sterile and sick release program. We have the actual numbers, were not a projected numbers. So that also was there. And there's some changes that directors, specific directors wanted made, and they were made. So I wouldn't call it material.
Yeah.
But I did provide a report to the board that showed the changes from the first reading to the second reading, and the majority of it was COVID.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned COVID, $86,000, a little more than $86,000 went specifically to Area D. During the original budget presentations, I know the board talked about COVID and that money and how it would be distributed, and a portion of the money, a large portion of it, was earmarked for RDOS corporately. But then some changes were made. So how did you determine how each electoral area would get that money, specifically Area D, and what that formula was?
So what happened is, of the money that was received, which I don't, just so that this is my opinion, not the board's or anyone else's opinion, I think that regional districts did not get their fair share. But of the money that we did receive, the board set aside 300,000 of 200, of which 250,000 would be to rent a facility for 5 years. The place here that we are working in is overflowing, and with the COVID restrictions that are out there, where we have one-way traffic, and it's not the safest way with, and it takes a lot of time when you have arrows, it says one way, you don't want to get a traffic ticket working in the office. What happened is, with the rest of the money was redistributed back based on population, the same population numbers that the province used to calculate the overall number. And then from that, there was two types of awards or funds that were given. One of them was for urban, one urban rural, and the other one was just rural. And based on the population, I made a chart that showed how much money each of the electoral areas got. And then I went through the budget, because you just can't spend it any way you want. It has to be COVID related. In fact, the rules are, at the end of this year, we're going to be audited on how we spent the money. And first of all, if we don't spend it all, we have to give it back. And the other thing is, if we spend it incorrectly, we have to give it back. So we have to be careful. So what I did is, I went through every one of the 155 services, looked at the electoral areas, and I made recommendations, and only recommendations. There's 3 pages here of recommendations that showed where the money could go. I got some calls from the electoral areas, and some of them had specific needs, and that I put it into the account that they wanted, the service that they wanted. And then I made the rest of them were recommendations. And the majority of it, just so that everyone out there knows, is we lost a lot of money in recreation last year. We're losing a lot of money this year. And that was already in the original draft budget, not knowing we were going to get any money. Well, once we got the money, we were able to put those monies back into the budget, which helped reduce the tax requisition.
When you say we lost a lot of money, you're talking really about revenue coming into the RDOS.
Yes.
That helps pay for the service.
Yes, that helps pay for the service. So a lot of people can't go swimming. A lot of people couldn't go skating. There's a lot of areas where we're making some money that helped offset the tax requisition. That wasn't there anymore.
All right, I want to remind people who are watching this live how you can participate. Of course, there are 3 different ways: WebEx Messenger, WebEx Audio, or video as well. And then, of course, by telephone. If you are watching and participating through WebEx, you can hit *3, and that will indicate that you would like to raise your hand. Or you can raise your hand, click the raise your hand button rather. If you're on the phone, you can hit *3 to indicate that you would like to ask a question. Of course, there is a Q&A section in WebEx as well. And if you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, you can always send an email to budget@rdos.bc.ca and get an email directly to Jim Zaffino, the Manager of Finance. And you can get more information at RDOS.regionalconnections.ca, and that is where we have the budget information posted. So I don't see any questions at this time, so I want to come back to COVID for just a moment. You mentioned, I believe it was about $56,000. I think you mentioned the number that was going to reduce.
55,817.
And what does that go into, and how does that apply to what the province has set out as a prerequisite for spending?
So first of all, originally it was 86,000. So 31,000 of that went to areas directly that the director wanted. So there's in the budget, there is some electronic equipment that Electoral Area D will be able to use to get some information out there. Of the 55,000, the areas that met the specific restrictions or lost revenue, for instance, that was the biggest single one. Extra costs, like for the fire departments. Fire departments, all of them incurred costs that the taxpayer will ultimately be paying. So each one of the electoral directors put in $7,500 extra in their budget. So that's not a taxed amount because that comes out of the grant. So that meets the criteria. Lost revenue meets the criteria. So all we needed to do is to prove that we had an X amount of revenue one year, we don't have it next year. I was conservative in that so that they can't say no. I used the money that we lost last year. Also, I said that's what I'm projecting we lose this year. And I spread that out. I recommended to the board that it be spread out based on each of the areas. And what one of the other areas too is we could pretty well prove that in all areas there's an extra cost. So rather than just being specific to the actual need, I did a general analysis and I documented everything I did for the auditors.
Now I'm going to check with John, who is helping us out behind the scenes here. I don't see any hands up, but I do see, it looks like exclamation mark beside Area Director Ron Obrick. Is that indicating that Director Obrick had a question? I'm not sure exactly what that's for, but maybe you can look into that for us. Anyway, a couple of different things. There's a lot to talk about with the budget. Jim, you make it sound easy. There's a lot going on behind the scenes. Before we move on away from COVID, the fire department you mentioned received, Oak Falls Fire Department received $7,500, and that money specifically goes to gear related to dealing with COVID. Is that right?
Protective care.
Yeah, protective gear.
Yeah, protective gear.
So PPE we call it, and whatever else goes along with that specific to the fire department.
Yes, and disinfectant, etc.
Yeah, and those costs are considerable too. When you talk about the regional district losing revenue coming in from programs and services, there are additional costs on top of that normally, I mean, if you look at some of our shots, you'll see there's disinfectant. There's a lot of additional costs that go into dealing with the pandemic, obviously. It
is, and is $7,500 enough? Probably not. But the limited amount of funds that the regional district got to redistribute, that's all we had to really deal with, because the rest of the taxpayers had to also be offset their tax increases. So just one other thing is municipalities smaller than the size of electoral area D got a million at least in some cases, or 600, 700,000 to deal with the COVID. And when you're talking about an area the size of electoral area D, which is OK Falls, Heritage Hills, and Carmi, that $80-something thousand, I don't believe was enough. Well, it was enough. There should have been more. You shared your thoughts with the province? No, but I'm sure that they may have heard you. Yeah. Okay. Not a laughing matter, but it's interesting. I know you've said that a few times. It's your opinion. It's my opinion. But, and I'm sure that the province probably heard from other regional districts if they have some concerns. But there is at least funding coming in. It's being put to use in the way the area directors feel that it's best used. Yes. But there are some challenges in dealing with that. Creating a budget during a pandemic where we still don't know how services will be affected in the long term, whether it's parks and rec services or other services, potentially additional costs. So you're trying to build a budget with a lot of what ifs. That's not a great way to budget, is it? I'd like more certainty, but a budget usually has history, and there's going to be, you can tell where there's going to be the bumps and curves. So we're hoping we put in enough control in there. We've got a very good board that I've had numerous meetings with the directors, so we have an idea. There's certain areas where there won't be any. A water main is a water main, sewer. The maintenance has to be done. The revenue has to be there. One of the anomalies that I've seen is that, because I did some research on how municipalities use their money, and a lot of times they use it for lost revenue for utilities. When I did my research for our water utilities, we didn't. So I didn't use any COVID money. I didn't recommend to use COVID money to fund water utility. Okay, I see that we do have a hand up from the sounds of it. Is that right, John? Yeah. We have a hand up from Area D Director Ron Obrick, who would like to make a comment or ask a question. And I believe, John, you'll have to bring the director in and make him live so he can speak to us. I believe that's how this is going to work. And I'll wait for John to do that. Again, my name is Eric Thompson. I'm the Communications Coordinator here at the RDOS. Jim Zaffino is our presenter tonight.
with the draft budget for Area D for 2021. Just went through second reading on March 4th, and adoption is third and the final reading, which would be adoption, is planned for the 18th of March at the RDOS board meeting. But there's no certainty that that could be the, I mean, if things didn't work out for some reason that date, you still have to pass this budget by March 31st, which is mandated by the province.
That's correct.
So what would happen if for some reason it didn't work out that way? Not to be difficult.
You'd have to have a special meeting.
You'd have to have a special meeting. Okay, that's what I thought. All right, so John, again, is working behind the scenes here. John, I believe you would, oh, do we have Director Obrick on the air now with us? I think we do.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you very much for your patience. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you, and wonderful, and thank you to both of you for your help. I just wanted to comment on the COVID restart money and the question that Eric had posed. I can confirm that the province knows how disappointed we are. At the LG, that's the Local Government Leadership Academy Forum, first week of February, this was the #1 topic of the Electoral Area Directors Association meeting. I was there. Many people expressed concern. Minister Osborne, the Minister of Municipalities, heard it. Our MLAs heard it. Rolly Russell, who's Parliamentary Secretary, Rural Economic Development, the Jobs and Economic Development Minister, Minister Ravi Kalhan, heard it. They're taking it to cabinet. They're very concerned, I think, because the way this was done, it was $270 million from the federal government sent to the province, which matched it with $270 million for $540 million total. The Premier announced that the distribution would favor smaller communities. So a big community like Vancouver would be capped. The formula is somewhat complicated, but just to illustrate, in our regional district, Osoyoos received $1.539 million. Oliver received $1.591 million. Keremeos, $659,000. Summerland, $2.724 million, population 11,600. Princeton, $1.013 million. We, as part of the regional district with a population of 4,000, which is similar to Oliver and Osoyoos, more than Princeton, Keremeos, as you've heard, we received approximately $86,900 in our area. Had we been a municipal district, we would have received $1.327 million. In other words, our form of governance cost us $1.24 million in this recent round of grant. It demonstrates what an impact it makes for a community like ours when we have a lot of needs, as the community members well know, infrastructure and other needs. We're not that different than Oliver or Osoyoos or Princeton or Keremeos or Summerland. This message has been heard by the province. Many electoral areas in the province expressed concern. Indeed, the chair of the regional district, Okanagan-Similkameen, Chair Kazakovich, sent a letter. So with respect to Eric's question, does the province know? The answer is yes. And they can't unspill the milk. The money was sent, but I think they're doing a consideration that will be specific to rural areas like us, electoral areas. At the Local Government Leadership Academy conference, our MLA, Rolly Russell, spoke to this issue. And he asked for patience, but he explained that the very creation of his position, Parliamentary Secretary for Rural Economic Development, something that hasn't been done before in this province, was an indication that the Premier and the Cabinet were very mindful of our needs, of our concerns. And reading between the lines, it sounds like they're going to be trying to be more respectful to us in some way. I don't know what that means exactly, but I think the numbers speak pretty loudly when we look at $1.59 million for Oliver and $86,000 for us. The difference, well, you know, the numbers speak pretty loudly. And it really demonstrates how difficult it is for us in our area D to keep up with our municipal partners in the regional district. Some people might say it's not fair. I can tell you many electoral area directors in the province are unhappy. That unhappiness has been expressed. I know there's nothing the regional district staff can do about it, but when you really drill down on the fairness or lack thereof, I think most of us appreciate how much money that is in a community like ours, how much we're not getting. So I'll stop talking on that now, but it's a big issue because it's until you paid attention, you just don't know. And when you don't know, you're not aware. And when you're not aware, you think wrongly, perhaps, that we're somehow getting a similar or equal or fair treatment. I don't think anybody who's fair-minded would consider this fair. Anyways, thanks for the opportunity to pass that on. If anybody's listening, that's information I'm sure they'd like to have.
Yeah, I appreciate you clarifying that for us, Director Oberick. Well, we've got you on the line. I know you'll be watching throughout this meeting. If there is anything else that you wanted to quickly add, or not quickly, but just add with regard to this budget and some of the changes that we may have seen during the March 4th second reading, things that residents of electoral area D may need to be aware
of. There's not a lot that I can think of off the top of my mind. I think Mr. Zavino's done an excellent job covering the highlights. I think what he demonstrated is the administrative overhead allocation has been changed by the board. This change is significant for us. It's a big part of our tax increase. The benefit goes to the municipalities. Again, if we were a municipality, we'd be getting the benefit. We're not a municipality, so we're getting that increased cost. For many years, it was done a different way. It's being changed now. This is a result of concern brought forth by municipal members of the board who felt they were paying a share that was not fair. And so, as Mr. Zavino outlined, this is fair. I personally care that it's fair. I think fairness is important. And fairness is a two-way street. We should be receiving a fair share as well as paying a fair share. And that's where there's more work to be done on the fairness analysis. But that's an interesting component when you drill down and analyze the numbers. Again, Mr. Zavino, I think, did an excellent job demonstrating that where I, as an elected official, have ability to have impact individually, it's very small. And of course, this creates some frustration when you look at a lot of the costs that we seem to not have a lot of ability to impact. And that's interesting when you analyze it. Again, this is a very complicated budget process, 155 individual budgets. I'm sure people who are watching this who are not familiar with it might already be wondering, about that kind of detail. But it is interesting when you do get to understand it, how it is different from what municipalities experience. So those are all my remarks for now, but thanks.
All right. Thank you very much, Director Oberick. Thank you for taking part. And I know, as I said, you'll be staying with us and tuning in. So if anything else comes up that you want to jump in on, please don't hesitate. And
thank you.
Jim Zavino, again, is the manager of finance with the RDOS. He put this budget together with, of course, a lot of input from the director, as he has with all of the budgets that the RDOS is dealing with, 155 different budgets.
Correct.
That's a lot of work. Let's talk for a moment about the service establishment bylaw compliance. So this was an issue that came to light during the loan authorization process for the Colleton Recreation Programming Parks and Facility Maintenance Local Service. So it was an alternative approval process for Colleton for Sickle Point. And the issue that came to light, I'll ask you to talk a bit about, but the RDOS became aware that the stated bylaw requisition limit set out in a small number of service establishment bylaws has been exceeded. And the RDOS has completed a review of the bylaws and identified those which are currently out of compliance. Every year, the regional district undertakes a public engagement process, that's in each electoral area and municipality, with respect to the budget for the upcoming year. And the RDOS has created videos specific to each electoral area, and they are posted on the RDOS website and on YouTube. You can find links on rdosregionalconnections.ca. And as I mentioned, the budgets now have changed because second reading has happened and there have been a few adjustments. We'll talk about that in a moment. The RDOS is now proposing to take a three-pronged approach to ensuring the 5-year financial plan is consistent with the requisition limit. And that's designed to mitigate issues that became a focus during the alternative approval process I mentioned earlier. The 3 steps include increased controls, processes, and training of department staff on bylaw interpretation. That's step 1. Step 2 is better communication and engagement with citizens. And step 3 is a focus on bringing outstanding bylaws back into compliance. So, Mr. Zaffino, that work is being undertaken right now. Let's start with step 2, better communication and engagement with citizens. With this pandemic, you weren't able to go out in person and have presentations where you may only have a handful of people in the room, but they can talk to you in person. Has the electronic process in some ways improved the process, made it more accessible to people, or how are you finding that?
It's different in that I've gone to budget meetings where no one shows up. I'm sitting there for 2 hours with I used to work with a municipality with the councillors and the mayor, and 2 hours it would be just us. Here, I think that there's more of opportunity where people from all over can come and listen. However, I don't think it's something that people are embracing because there's more exciting things than the budget. One of the things that is available is the budget is online, and as Eric just talked about, is a control for budget or bylaw compliance. Every single budget now, all 155 have the bylaw number, have the year that it was created. It has the tax limit, if there is one, and if the budget is compliant to the bylaw. So that's new. It's actually new as of the second reading. And what is going to happen is that it will not just show if it's compliant for the current year. It's going to show based on, it's a 5-year budget that we have. I'm going to be working on it so that it will show if it's compliant for the full 5 years of the budget, taking into account a increased assessment, because usually there's 2 types of limitations. One is a flat rate dollar limit, another one's based on a mill rate, based on assessment. And what I'll be doing is the formula will be increasing based on average assessment increases for the 5 years, and then determining what the projected limit is. And what that does is it allows the board to instantly see if what they're accepting isn't compliant or not.
I see Director Oberg's hand is still up. I'm not sure if that's a leftover hand from earlier, but I'll ask him to lower it if he can, just so we know if he, yeah, there we go. Thank you very much, just in case he was waiting to talk to us. When we talk about community engagement, when we have these electronic forms available, it can certainly we can reach a larger audience, but we still have to think, of course, of those people who don't have access to internet or don't have good internet service. It's great to be in person to have these presentations where you put boards up, boards around, posters, but that of course wasn't possible this year because of COVID. So in years, as we go forward, what would your hope be post-COVID for budget presentations to make sure everybody has an opportunity to see?
Well, when I was here 14 years ago, I did what I call a roadshow. Is any director that wanted me to go into the area, we'd rent a hall, we'd bring a lot of different information, and we'd do question and answer. We'd sit around. What I have done in the past also is we'd rent the library, bring donuts and coffee. Again, we'd have information available, and I'd be there for 2-3 hours along with the counselors I worked with, or in this case here would be the director. So that would be the best. I wouldn't mind. I don't mind driving to Tulameen or Oak Falls or wherever. I did that, but because of COVID, we can't do that right now.
Well, and I think the key too is how people who pay taxes, who pay into these services, would like to receive the information. Budgets aren't necessarily something that a lot of people are engaged in until they realize what they're paying, and then maybe after the fact they want to weigh in. But I think the more you can engage people in the way they like to be engaged is key. So receiving that feedback is vital, and that's where RDOS Regional Connections comes in. If someone wants to send a note, of course it is online, but you can also pick up the phone and share that information, because that's valuable for you as a person behind some of the budget numbers.
What's also important is that a budget just isn't in a specific time frame. Like we started October and then in March. A budget is all year round. You look at the services. If you don't like something that you're paying for, we need to know. However, there's certain services that have to be done, where you can't say I don't want water anymore, or I can't sewer lines, etc. But you can't say I'm more interested in this than that, because there's a lot of times we do have a citizen survey, for instance. That's a good time to put in your input. Give us your suggestions. Citizen surveys are important. I use that through the council that I worked with intensely. It's something that when the council of the day that I worked with considered a budget, they looked at the citizen survey, and I was just talking to the staff here. It's actually the silent majority speaks, and it helps your director look at where the funds should go. We have limited amount of funds that we need to put in where they're needed. So that would be I would say, let's use the citizen survey more for budgets.
So the slideshow that you've shown us tonight was the budget after second reading. It's
Yes.
changed. It's the version that you would see in the videos that are posted on Regional Connections.
That was first reading.
Will the new slideshows be available, and the changes in the detailed budgets be available online? Is that something you're able to turn around?
Yes, can be.
Obviously, the videos I don't think will change, because that's been, and there haven't been significant
I will
changes.
forward those to you.
But I think the slideshows would certainly be of interest to people, and yeah, we can discuss that
Yeah, we can
more.
discuss
But I
that
think making that available so people can get
Yeah.
even more information.
And they should.
detail.
They should.
Okay. So again, Jim Zaffino is the Manager of Finance with the RDOS. My name is Eric Thompson. I'm the Communications Coordinator here at the Regional District, and we are presenting the draft budget for 2021. If you've just joined us earlier on, Mr. Zaffino had a chance to go through some of the slides for the budget after second reading. And of course, if you're watching this on YouTube after March 4th, you can go back into the video recording and watch it at your leisure. And in the meantime, we still have some time left for questions if anyone has any. And I will remind you that if you are watching on WebEx, if you're logged into WebEx, you can ask a question by raising your hand. You'll find that button on the right side under Participants Panel. And that's on the right side of your screen. That will indicate that you would like to speak. And if you are on the phone, you can hit *3 on your phone's keypad. That will indicate that you would like to ask a question as well. And then, of course, we have WebEx Messenger. Jim, when you put a budget like this together, as you mentioned, it's not a short-term process. It is a fluid document throughout a period of time. I know during the budget presentation for Area I, we talked a little bit about this. The process starts pretty early on in the year, and it's not just starting with you hitting the computer. It really is the area director and some conversations you have and feedback from residents as well.
It actually starts with the area director talking to the managers of within the regional district. From that, the staff then starts producing what they think is the cost, because it's not just me. It's you see me up in front, but right to my side is the director leading the charge, but behind the director is you've got 9 senior managers that are helping them, or that he's talking to, and then they talk to me with costs, etc. I don't have the costs. It's a lot of the costs are coming into me from the senior managers, and they deserve credit too, along with the directors.
This budget meeting goes, the budget presentation right now goes for another half an hour. So we have some time. We don't have a lot of questions. I think what I might do is see if we can, if you don't mind, load up your slideshow again and maybe talk a bit about some of the slides. We can go through some of them. While we're loading that up, I'm going to ask you about that Project Reserve Tracker that you talked about.
Okay.
That's a new feature.
Yes.
How did that come about?
I brought it with me from my last position. I started working with the West Kelowna, where it was a brand new municipality with nothing, and we needed a tracking mechanism to know what we can afford, what the priorities were. So I created a 10-year Project Reserve Tracker, which allowed us to determine what's affordable. And it's a little easier in the municipalities because you've only got 4 funds, essentially 4 budgets. However, with this, I had 155, so it was a challenge creating it, but what it happens is every single reserve that we have, and we have 155 services, like I said, but we have 100 or over 160 different reserves for that fund all the majority of the services. And in some cases, one service may have more than one reserve. So as the managers are looking at the 5 year, this is 5 years, the 5-year program, we put the costs in, it automatically commits that cost off of the reserve that we have. And it tells you right on the form, okay, you want a $200,000 project funded from this reserve, you don't have enough money. And what it does too is it allows me as the finance manager to look at every project, all 155 capital, and determine a minimum and maximum reserve. I'm used to having that. The board's created, based on a staff recommendation, a minimum maximum operating reserves. And each reserve now, or each service will have an operating reserve. And it will have to have a minimum, because you don't want to go too low, but you also don't want to go too high. You don't want to overtax. And by having those controls, that's something that the directors said, okay, let's have a maximum too.
Before we get to that slideshow, the new slideshow after second reading, we talked earlier about revenue being affected by COVID-19, revenue from things like the swimming pool, skating, services that bring money in to help pay for those services.
Yeah.
As the manager of finance, are you involved with conversations either with staff or with the area director to potentially look at increasing funds? For example, I know the folks in community services are looking at how facilities are rented out and marketing them, and just ideas around trying to encourage better use of some of these facilities, because there's some great facilities in the regional district and maybe are underutilized, and there's some real opportunities here to increase some revenue. Are you involved in that conversation?
So we have great managers, and we have a recreation manager and a facilities manager that will bring recommendations. They will go through us. We don't have the final say, but we would take a look at it and make recommendations to them and how we go. I just started looking at some of our fees, and a good example is our administration fee, which other areas charge us for services, and they're charging us 18% admin fee for services that we provide that they provide for us. And I'm looking at it, and it looks like we need to look at that, because that needs to be we don't want to subsidize another municipality. So am I looking at fees? Yes.
Everything's on the table.
Everything. I'm close to finishing the budget. I'm looking at, started helping with year end. Our year end's due soon in the next 2 weeks. But I also started looking at user fees that I want to start being involved in and make some recommendations.
Let's go back to your slideshow then, if you don't mind. Earlier on, if you have just joined us, Jim Safino presented his slideshow, which is a new version of the original slideshow you may have seen for Electoral Area D. And this one is after second reading, which took place on March 4th. And why don't we just start with the budget structure here, Jim? When you say each service is self-sustaining, that's a really good point. It's a unique structure to begin with for a regional district, but services within the regional district. Can you talk a bit about how they're self-sustaining?
Self-sustaining means that they have to support themselves. A good example would be we have a number of water services. One water service cannot fund and help fund another water service. Every municipality has its own water and sewer system. They are what I would call self-sustaining. In fact, in some cases, they're allowed to take money from any profits from these utilities and move them over to others, while we aren't. The most that we can do is put it into its own service. If it's not self-sustaining, that's when you were talking about the rates. That's when you have to look at the rates. Are we charging enough? Are we being fair? Because that's the other thing too, is it a service that is mandatory? That's neat. Water is. So that's something that is a life service. So you have to try to get it in the most affordable way also. It's not just increasing the costs, is what can we do to keep the costs reasonable? So that's important too.
Yeah, and here you say that there are 155 separate services, 155 separate budgets. The budgets aren't transferable between one or the other. You can't top up a budget with some funds from another budget.
No, you can't. Like I said, it's important that they are self-sustaining. And one of the reasons that you do have a bylaw with a tax limit is that tax limit should be set at a level where it can be self-sustaining. So when I say self-sustaining, it's not always user fees. It's the tax that it brings in to actually support the service. So that's important.
Let's take a look at some of your other slides. And while we do that, I think one of the question marks you always have with any budget is grants and funds coming in from other sources, particularly the federal and provincial levels of government.
Yes.
And those are the question marks. The funding doesn't come in, project doesn't necessarily happen.
So there's just over $5 million in the budget that are contingent on grants. So what it is you're not being taxed for it because it shows it in the revenue and then it shows it in as the expense side, but it is identified as contingent only on receiving grants. Now, one of the things we earlier talked about is the project reserve tracker. One of the benefits it has is in that 5-year tracker for each of the services, it should have planning for whatever, planning for a park, planning for a bridge, whatever, because the planning means that the project is shovel ready. So you're not spending millions of it. You're just spending enough to have a plan ready that if a grant comes up, you've got the project shovel ready. That's something that was utilized very heavily in my previous position. And that's something, this organization is awesome in the way that it applies for grants, but it would be nice to have it more of a control where the board actually sees it a year or 2 years ahead, saying, we need this project, we need this funds to be shovel ready in year 2 or 3 or 4. So that's something that I see happening in very near future, like next year.
During board meetings, I know this has come up where board directors have asked about those available grants that are out there and our staff looking into that and tracking it and how does everybody know what's out there and what's available? What would you say to that? Because I know there are grants that come up that you may not even have known are available. And I've been listening to some different podcasts about making finding funds for filmmaking, for example, for independent filmmakers. There are funds out there that aren't being tapped into because no one knew about it. But more and more, I think it's something that staff are trying to uncover and making sure they share with the area director. Is that right?
Yes. So a lot of times, if they're federal, provincial, we will get notified, as does all the other local governments. But the ones that you're talking about, that's the ones where you get what I call fishing. So, and that I encourage that,
yeah.
Where you ask the staff when they have time, let's go fishing for something that's out there that we don't know about. And that's something that I favor, I recommend. And the more fishing you go, the less taxes that are out there and the more facilities are built.
Is that something that would be initiated by an area director, or would it be initiated?
It should be initiated. It should be initiated at the staff level.
Okay. Learning something here again. Every budget meeting I host with you, I learn something new. On this slide here, it says that the public consultation process, you can find the budgets under Hot Topics. Hot Topics is where we, of course, post information releases. So if you go through there, you'll find connections to RDOS regional connections. So the budgets, detailed budgets are posted on the RDOS website, but we're using RDOS regional connections, which is the new public engagement website for the RDOS as a way of, as a hub really for information. So when you click on the budget tab at RDOS regional connections, you'll find links to everything you need to know about budget 2021. Let's go to the next slide, Jim, and there's a few more things we can talk about before we wrap up. And again, if anyone has any questions and you're watching, I see Director Obrick has his hand up again, so we'll ask him if he wants to jump in and he has a comment or a question for us. And Director Obrick, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. You can hear me?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful. Just wanted to comment on the question that Eric had on grants. And I agree with Mr. Zaffino completely that this is something that you would like to hope that was done at the staff level. This is one of those areas where we have room for improvement. Before I was elected, my predecessor would speak often at various commission meetings that I sat on, mentioning that we were missing out on all kinds of grant opportunities. And I would listen to him and I would say, well, that doesn't make you look very good. If you know you're missing out, you have staff, why aren't you doing more? So I chose to run as director, wanting to make things better, and things that I've done to change that. Before I was elected, I spoke with staff about the need for more in this area, invited staff to our commission meetings specific to this purpose. Since being elected, one of the things we did with the Okanagan Falls Economic Development Office is we reorganized that office and gave a little bit of specific emphasis to the importance of these grants. And Mr. Zavino is correct. There's a lot of grant applications that the RDOS does very well. And at the same time, there are other grants that are just missed. I myself, before being elected, discovered a grant and was successful getting funds raised myself. I've been sharing that information in the community. At that Economic Development Office, one of the things we're trying to do is create a relationship, a liaison with the community at large, so we can match projects with opportunities. For example, in the first year I was elected, we missed out on a BCAA grant that I became aware of. And because our office was not functioning at that time, we didn't even put in an application. I just can't emphasize enough how important these grants are to us. And when you have other levels of government or other organizations like BC Gaming Grants Branch, for example, they're BCAA, another example. There's real estate. There's so many that we miss out on because if you don't put in an application, you're not going to be successful. I can pretty much guarantee that. I think Wayne Gretzky said he missed 100% of the shots he didn't take. We're not taking the shots. That's something we can do better on. In the future, I know we will do better, but that's work and that's focus. That's a goal. That's an objective. It's achievable. Other communities do it. I've talked to other communities. So this is something that I've been doing at the director level. But boy, I would love to get more support at the staff level. And so when I hear Mr. Zavino talk like that, you have no idea how grateful I am to hear those words. This is something that really is important in an area like ours, and in all the electoral areas, to be blunt. But our community, Okanagan Falls specifically, we're different. We have a wastewater treatment plant. We're urban. We have needs that these grants that we're talking about. It's good to be aware. And the key about having staff in our office that help us with this, again, if you know anything about these grants, a lot of times you don't even know about them until they're closed and you can't even apply. So you kind of have to be ready. Sometimes they open with a short notice. You maybe have a month to before they close. And if you're not paying attention and sensitive to the community need, you basically end up like my predecessor, Director Tom Sidden, at a community meeting saying, we're missing out on a lot of grants. And that was true historically. And I think looking forward, we need to do better. And if we look at other communities, and I've talked to other communities and I reached out before I was elected, this is something that other communities have done a better job at. And we certainly can do better. And I hope we do better. But wow, I'm so glad to have Eric's participation, because I know, as Eric said, he's learning a lot, and that's a good thing when we learn, and then if we can apply, just think how exciting it could be if we had some successes. So I wanted to put some light on that. If anybody's watching or they watch the recording later, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. And we have lots we need to do further in this area. So I just wanted to put emphasis on that, because in a community like ours, that it makes a really big difference if you're not missing out on those opportunities. Thank you.
Director Obrecht, thank you very much for weighing in. So when we talk about grants, go ahead, Jim.
I have a comment on this because I have an opinion. So I have a lot of opinions. Regional districts are at a disadvantage when it comes to applying for grants, mainly because in our area, we have 9 electoral areas, and each electoral area for applying for grants are competing against each other. And I think that the way that grants are handed out should be different for regional districts than they are for municipalities. A municipality applies for a grant, everyone gets benefit. They don't have to look at if it's competed or not. But in this case here, A can be competing against D or D against E, and that's something that should be looked at in the future.
I think what's also interesting about what Director Obrick said is when you talk about staff looking for grant opportunities, a lot of times there are specific projects and you're looking for a grant to go along with it. You have a project in mind, so you look for a grant. To go out on those fishing expeditions, as you mentioned, which is a great idea to see what is available, that isn't necessarily part of a day-to-day work plan or a yearly work plan to just spend a lot of time on.
No. First of all, when I was going back to that grant tracker, and that are the grant and the project reserve tracker, there's shovel-ready projects that are ready to go. Let's say the board authorizes 10 or 12 of them. You don't necessarily wait for an email to come to you to see if any of those 10 or 12 qualify. What I would call is fishing is, let's take a look to see if we can find something on that list that does qualify. Let's go out there and look.
Yeah.
We don't, as far as grants go, a lot of times you have to take a look at the possibility of a part-time grant writer or not a full-time. In another world, we looked at, did a business plan, a grant writer, and looked at not a full FTE, but a portion of FTE that was combined with another position. And we kept track of the success that grant writer had, where they were paying for themselves, because we're not talking about grants we would normally get. You look at grants that are above and beyond that we would not normally get.
And that's a very good point too. When you talk about resources and available resources, grant writing can take a lot of time.
Yes.
And having dedicated people on staff who can do that or part-time or available to put in some of the time that is required is really important. That's not always available.
No, and that's correct. Staff's got a capacity box that is filled. And that's why you'd have to look at a business plan in the future to see if would it be worthwhile contract basis or on a part-time basis. But that's down the road.
Yeah, and we want to keep going with a few other items while we have an opportunity. And on the closing note on this, when we talk about grants, as you said, a lot of times the grants that are available, that information does come to regional districts and municipalities. There's a regular fund that you know about, and they're usually not hidden, which is nice.
That's correct.
But anyway, it's good conversation. I see Director Obrick's hand is still up, so I just want to make sure that wasn't a leftover hand. I think he's good now, so we'll just keep moving on. Oh, hand is back up again. Hard to say what's going on there. I'm seeing some flashing back and forth. Let's keep moving on with the slideshow if we can. When we talk about emergency planning, 911, there's regional services that all of the electoral areas and municipalities are paying into. That's still it's not cut and dry how that gets divvied up, how everyone pays for that.
Oh, it is in that right now. It's based on assessment, and those are services that economies of scale say that it should be the regional district that does control it and pays the bills and then redistributes the costs.
I see.
Otherwise, if we've had 6 municipalities and 9 electoral areas, essentially, if you treat the 9 as one, and do you want 6 emergency 911 contracts? No, you want it going through one area. Same thing with there's regional recreation that helps. The other areas that for it says here for heritage, for instance, isn't it better to have it controlled from one organization and have a consistency throughout the whole area rather than inconsistency from everyone having something different? The next one here it's even more specific. If we look at illegal dumping, how would it be if there's no control and people just outside the city limits of Summerland start dumping their stuff? You need a control, and we are the control. So we provide a service that I think at the end of the day is efficient and helps the taxpayer as a whole.
it looks like Director Obrecht does have his hand up for another question, so we'll ask him to join us again. Director Obrecht, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, I was trying to get recognized earlier. Sorry, I thought you were recognizing me, and that's why I was flashing the hand so I could speak.
I wasn't sure.
With respect to grants, this is, again, I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but there's so much more to this than many grants. I'm not satisfied the RDOS gets notice of a lot of the grants that are available. That's the first point, and that's something that could be done better. Indeed, that's why we wrote it into our Economic Development Office specifically to build in, to get that capacity, because before I was elected, I went looking and couldn't get support from staff, and specifically received some discouragement on that topic. And I could talk a lot on that, but I won't today. But secondly, we need to share information between the electoral areas. There's 9 of us, and the more we share, the better. Now, that's hard to do under our current system. Thirdly, what Mr. Zaffino said, real interesting. I was speaking with Greg Moore, the former mayor of Port Coquitlam, and he was the chair of the Vancouver Regional District for many years. That regional district system has only one electoral area. That's UBC, about 25,000 population. We have only one municipality that has a bigger population than that. That's Penticton, of course. The other 5 municipalities have a smaller population, and then we have 9 electoral areas. So when they're doing their regional district business, it's a very different experience. It's a very different functionality. But those municipalities all can apply. Not only can they apply for grants individually, where our electoral areas sometimes can't, but they also qualify for grants, many of which are limited to municipalities. So the inequities compound one upon another. And yet, if you, for just one quick example, Federal Minister Melanie Joly was in Penticton at the Chamber at a luncheon meeting on, it was Thursday, May 23rd, 2019. I attended. I invited other members of our board to attend. It was a board day, so the decision was made not to attend. Mayor Vasilaki was there. That's the only other member of our board that I think was there. But her presentation was impressive, and the number of grants that she spoke to federally, so many that are available that I've never heard a whisper of at the board table, and yet they relate specifically to our region. I could go into great detail. It's fascinating stuff. So when you have other levels of government trying to help us, and then at our end, we're not even queuing for the opportunity, and that's been our experience in OK Falls. We don't even know what grants there are. Nobody's applying. We're left on our own because we're an electoral area, and I've been told in the past that you don't want to be in the middle of competitive bids between electoral areas, so the Martin Street office prefers not to get involved. And I'll tell you, it's an area that really is ripe for improvement. And since we're talking about it, I'm taking advantage of this opportunity to share it with both of you, because these seeds, if they get some fertile soil, it would be a good thing. Now, in our office, again, I understand staff time and cost of grant writing and all that, but there's many grants that don't take a lot of staff time. It can be a very simple service, a liaison between the community and our staff, where we can help people. And we have Grant in Aid, of course, as an example that we administer, but then there's community foundations, which is local, which has lots of opportunities. And there's other things like that we can, we don't have to invest a lot of money into staff time, but we can provide a very valuable assist function. And just another example is housing. Oh my goodness. You look at what the province is putting into housing. And we've had success in OK Falls with $7.4 million roughly through BC Housing. The office in our community was very instrumental in getting that done. But that was our community did that. We had some staff from planning as we went through it. Another one is broadband. If you look at connectivity and broadband and what's being offered, and we had there was a SILGA meeting yesterday I attended. The TELUS manager out of Kelowna, his name is Jeff Cruikshank, and I've called and left him a message already. You know, Director Gittins was at the meeting, said, how do we get on the list? He says, call me, I'll get you on the list. Well, that's interesting, but are we on the, I mean, why aren't we on the list? If we look at municipalities, metropolises, you know, obviously the big ones like Carameus and Princeton, they have a different system of governance. They are having success. Even 2019, they applied and got recognized on connectivity. We need connectivity just as much. But because we're different, we don't get seen the same, we don't get heard the same, we don't get the same outcomes, we don't get the same experience. So I know it's a repetition on a theme, but when you don't know that you don't know things, there's a real communication opportunity to get understanding, get awareness raised so that you are aware that there are these opportunities that we're missing out on. And I'll tell you, it's been a challenge having this kind of a communication. Again, we did a lot of work in our area. We're getting, I hope to be successful, but if we can get more help out of the staff on Martin Street, oh my goodness, that would be appreciated. And that's a big deal. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Obrick, for your comments. Appreciate it. That's Area D Director Ron Obrick. Jim Zafino, we have just a few moments left to talk a bit about the next steps for the budget. And as we mentioned, March 4th, second reading, a few changes to each of the, were there changes to all of the 9 electoral area budgets as a result of the
minor changes? Not every one changed, but there were some changes, yes.
And then what happens between March 4th and potential adoption March 18th?
Technically, the board can change budget right up until adoption, and some directors have to approach me looking at some changes that they, some minor changes that they had because they have new knowledge they had. So.
And the budget consultation process has happened in the sense that you go to the public and get feedback and input, and then the budget itself is established. But you're still getting, are you getting feedback from people? I think I heard you earlier say you just received the one email.
I've just received one so far for feedback.
And what would happen if you were getting a lot of feedback from people, and even from these presentations, what can happen with that feedback? I
forward the feedback to the board, and then the board would consider what the feedback.
Okay. I see Director Obrick's, his hand is gone now, so he's good for now. Just a couple of minutes left, so let's go back through your slideshow. I think this is an interesting opportunity to delve a little deeper into the budget. You've talked a lot about the mosquito control program, in that each electoral area doesn't really have a lot of say because that program is administered in a unique way. So
the mosquito program is administered and billed on a 3-year average based on usage. So in a bad year where we got a lot of complaints, and when we get complaints, we'll send staff up there. That area is going to pay more. And for 2021, what the board decided, because the costs were starting to get extravagant, that they used a portion of the reserve to artificially reduce the tax requisition. And staff will be looking at ways of improving the service and being, they are efficient now, but just taking a look at what else we can do to keep the costs reasonable.
We've spoken already on this program about the citizen survey, how that feedback can really help with the budget process and with services in general. I'm thinking of one of the comments that I read on the latest, the 2020 citizen survey, that said something along the lines of, without raising taxes, without raising costs to the taxpayer, improved services on it was, I can't recall exactly what it was. That's a challenge. If you want to, I mean, because I think generally people who are paying taxes feel that the level of service should be at a certain level, and if it's not where it should be, they want it to be up there, but they don't necessarily want to pay more. So what feedback can you give people on that? Is it a matter of finding efficiencies?
There's just so many efficiencies you can find. And you're right, it can be a challenge where the services that we are providing are efficient. We just don't throw out staff and say, go do it in the least efficient way. You always look for efficiencies, always. So don't assume, a lot of people just assume because it's government's doing it, it's not efficient. Government is as efficient as can be. As far as I'm concerned, and this organization is concerned, we don't have unlimited funds. You look at what can we afford with what we've got. So if anyone asks, I want a higher level of service, what you're also saying is, I'm going to have to pay for it.
I think I'm hitting all the hot button topics here for Director Obrick. I see his hand is up and he has another comment. Director Obrick, we just have about 3 or 4 minutes left, but please jump in.
Oh, and thank you so much. And you're so right about hitting the hot buttons, and thank you for doing so. I think it's very productive, and I appreciate it. 2 points, and this 2 things can be true at the same time. And I want to be careful to emphasize both. The first is we get great value on our taxes through the RDOS, great value. You look at what we're getting and the cost, there's been a great job done by staff, and it's fantastic. So that's the first point. But the second thing that's also true, and Mr. Zaffino hit on it perfectly, there is opportunity to find better value for money. And that's what that comment was about, is people in our community, they really appreciate respect for their tax dollar, and they appreciate good value. I'll give you one quick example. I can give you many. But our transit service, which I strongly support transit, is in bad need of review. We have supply where we don't have demand. We have demand where we don't have supply. We have an opportunity to do better. I've spoken about it at the board table. Chris Fudge, who's the provincial BC provincial fellow, I've talked to him at the board table twice off the board table, asking for some assistance, which he's offered. Now, COVID has been a big speed bump in the last year, but this is just one example of an area where we could get better value. And I could give more. This is hard work. You can tell that I care about it, and I want to just make this clear. People in our community, they understand. They're intelligent. They respect the taxes they pay, and they just want the return respect that they get good value. And so what we hear, we seldom hear when the garbage gets picked up. Garbage can be picked up 4,000 properties every week, but when it gets missed, we hear. We have to be able to hear that feedback without being offended, because sometimes there is opportunity where we can get a little better value, and that's not to lose sight of the fact that we get great value overall. And so those 2 things are true, and it's not an either or. I know that's a little bit complicated when you start to understand that both those things can be true at the same time. But thank you for the opportunity to comment, because you're right, that's a hot button.
Thank you, Director Obrick. Thank you so much for joining us tonight and weighing in on some of these topics. And thanks to everyone else who participated as well. And for those of you watching, whether you're watching the live broadcast or if you're watching after the fact on YouTube, Jim Zaffino, always a pleasure. Thank you very much for all the hard work you and your team have done. Really appreciate you spending time with us here for this budget presentation for the draft budget 2021 for Area D.
Thank you very much.
And thank you.
And remember, if you'd like to
thank you both.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Thank you both very much as well. Thank you.
And remember, if you'd like to find out more about projects and initiatives at the RDOS, including Budget 2021, you can go to rdosregionalconnections.ca and you can find a lot more information there. Thanks again for joining us.
Good work, Aaron. Thank you.
Thank you.